Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years, and our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it.
I must boldly declare my commitments to others. And now actually commitment / reality. There's two sides of that. Makes sense? So in the first part, before we set the goals, whatever, you must boldly be willing to declare your reality to others. And once we set the targets, right, you must be boldly willing to declare those targets to them as well. Does that make sense, y'all? Kind of jumped ahead a little bit there, but and here's the other part. This is important to understand too. I must consciously and consistently associate with people who are driven like me. I must consciously, I got confused myself. Consciously and consistently associate with people who are driven like me. Why? Because we're pushing the same way and you're all about association. There's a big part of this, of what happens to most people. And it kind of brings people down in this reality, in this game of success or business or whatever it is. It's why you see people rise up and you watch people fall down. Watch people rise up and fall down. Why do you think it is? Two things that really kind of, this is separate, I'm just on a tangent right here. But number one, they become okay with good. So what do you see happen in our business? Especially here. People crush it, come and make $10,000, $20,000 in a month, $25,000, and then the next month, what do?
Stop showing up.
They don't do shit. They're on their third vacation this month, right? Or whatever it is. And then next time, they go right back down to that. And so what keeps us from going back to this enemy of good, I like to call it, is having very clear targets, because I don't really give a shit about how much came in next month if I'm focused on what? My target. Because what happens is, especially on the outside sales at least, right? The number just keeps rising no matter what. If I stay conscious on these commitments here to my sales numbers, that's when you have consistency and you're not riding that roller coaster. Does that make sense? Second problem we run into, which is what made me think of this, about the consciously and consistently associate with people who are driven like me, is most people tend, especially outside of here, this is may trigger some people. I got this from my coach, but they tend to go be the king of the shitheads, right? Right? They tend to be king of shits. What's that mean?
Best good guy in the room.
Right? Yeah, you're the best good guy in a small pond. Right? Best good guy in a small pond. That's one thing that you learn. That's why you got to constantly get around and stay around people who are thinking big, doing big things. That's why I try to get away as much as possible and do things around big thinkers. Right? In regards to business, or going to the Warrior thing, or even going out of town last week. Got to town with the dude that owns a plane. You start thinking shit a lot bigger. Right? You realize that you got something, or think that you know something about business, until you go with someone who's doing 5, 10x what you do. The way they think, the way they talk, the way they operate, the way they buy things, right? It's crazy, And so part of it is making you think bigger in regards to what it is. Does that make sense? And so, question?
Well, I was just going to say, you talked about this at the party too, like what you're saying about trying yourself with others. Like, I always thought that I was just really bad, right, with following up with certain friends from high school or even college, and then I kind of realized in the last few weeks of 2019 that it wasn't that. It's just like when I try to explain to them what I'm doing here, they're like, hey, come visit, and I'm like, no, I need to put this time in to do this, and just explain like the roadmap that I'm on. They're just like, oh, it's always something like, oh, well, you have to live life a little, or there's always some kind of excuse that they are giving me to battle what I want out of my own life.
Right.
But they're also the first people that, you're doing so great, I don't know how you're doing it, and they'll tell me their struggles, but like, they don't understand the connection there. I'm like, do you not see like your struggles here, and you want this?
It's a two-sided pull, right?
But then, but on the same time, now being here and doing all this, my relationship with my brother, we've always been close, but it's that much better because he is of this kind of mindset. And so now we're able to connect more and kind of, ping ideas off of each other and motivate each other, because he's like, finally now you're drinking the juice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's true, right?
It's cool.
I mean, that's one thing that, you know, you understand, and part of that's who you become in that process, right? And so we've told that analogy a million times that, you know, thoroughbreds don't like to hang out with donkeys, right? Just if you watch them, they don't really do that, right? And they're in the same, you know, arena. But the reality is it's all mindset and who you become in that process. It's not about the money or not about the reality. It's about who you become as that person as you go through this. And you go back to me, but the reality is those are big things there with that. So, number one, we got to be away from the enemy of good. This is what happens here. People lose a couple pounds, right? What do? They just stop there and they'll gain 4 or 5 back and they'll just kind of float around there, right? The enemy of good is what takes a lot of people down. Number two, be aware of being a king of the shitheads. Meaning that you go outside of places where people are just normal living in that life of, you know, the resolutions or whatever it is in that regard. I was watching people post things on Facebook about, oh, I was on the treadmill for 45 minutes. You know, I'm going to get on tomorrow and hopefully turn it on, right? That's basically, like, that's just them trying to make humor of them not fucking doing the work. Bottom line, right? And so the reality is, like, I want to be around winners who have already crushed the treadmill, doing those things, and already done with it by 7 a.m., right? And so that's where you got to understand is I want to be on people who are pushing me because why? They'll tell you things like Katie said. Oh, well, you know, you got to live a little bit, right? You got to live a little bit. Like living for me is like being super comfortable, paying my bills, feeling great, having confidence, growing my, you know, as a man, right? Doing certain things and having a happy, fulfilling relationship, right? They'll tell you one thing and then they'll unload on you about how terrible life is 5 minutes later. And so the reality is you got to understand and see through that, and part of that takes protecting that. You guys with me on that? What you got?
Some of protecting it is giving yourself permission, though. I mean, I experienced it last year hardcore among anyone outside of this building when I was doing 75 hard, and then going back on it again this year. And I'm ready for the negative talk because it's admittedly an extreme way to live for 75 days.
Right.
What's that?
So 75 hard, it's 75 days straight, 2-a-day workouts. One has to be outside. You're on a strict diet with no cheat days, 0 alcohol.
It's kind of crazy.
Reads a book every day and a progress picture. For 70, and you have to document it for 75 days.
And it's just a way to build like very intense discipline, right?
Gallon of water every day too. But yeah, it's just a way to kind of reboot and reset yourself. But there was so much negative speak around it, like, oh my God, you gotta live with moderation, or oh, when do you have fun, or when do you eat things that are awesome. Like, and the reality was, like, towards the back end of it, I realized that some people associate happiness with that extra order of fries or whatever it is, and maybe you're happy in that moment, but what's really happy is waking up and not feeling sore in the mornings and not being lethargic and being able to come to work and be productive, and then you realize you've done what you used to do in 10 hours in a day in 4, and it's the clarity and the focus. So, but back to the point is that giving yourself permission to be an enemy of good is probably the biggest way to unlock that.
That's a great point. I didn't tell about that, right? So be willing to give yourself permission, right, to get away from the enemy of good. And what I mean by that, just comfortable, right? It's so easy. I get all the time, oh, you just be comfortable and just sit back a little bit. What happens is as you go back into that, the problem is you're never going to stay where you're at. I've learned this the hard way so many times, right? You can never stay where you're at. Meaning that I'm always either pushing ahead, right? But the minute I slow down and stop, what happens? I go backwards, fast, right? And it's hard to get that momentum back. And so like I was telling you a million times, it's much easier to keep up than it is to catch up. Because catching up takes a lot more energy, a lot more effort, and it's painful. And so as we're able to push, and that's the thing, you're not trying to do anything crazy over 90 days. It's just what? Daily consistency over and over and over, stacking these habits of winning the day each and every day based on a clear target though, right? Because here's the deal. All work's not created equal. You can come and hustle and work your butt off, but that doesn't necessarily mean you don't get the result. And so what this focuses on is the only thing that matters is results. Period, right? And so that's the key thing there. Last part we'll go through. Ultimately, we've got to determine 2 things. What happens the next 90 days, right? Your result's going to be based on your amount of focus, period. That's all that matters, right? Our level and intensity of focus. And the crazy part about this, I messaged Alex about this morning, is that we think we're at a certain level, but the problem is there's a whole nother level you can access you don't even know about. Right? And so that's just something that's important that we got to constantly be searching. But 2 things drive this focus. Fruit and feelings. Right? Fruit is the facts of kind of what we want, right? But the other part of that really stops us and hinges on this is our feelings. Like I mentioned before, day 1 through 5, the first 2 weeks of this challenge is pretty cool. You're going to do great, be excited about it. But then life happens, things happen, and what do you go back to? We result back to our feelings, and once our focus is driven by feelings, we're done. Right? The most successful people in the world are super disciplined and do it no matter what, regardless of how they feel. And that's the key part of how we get away with that, right? And what drives or hurts us, number one that kills us or makes us, is our stories. What would be a story about that?
I'll just get back on board tomorrow.
Exactly right. That's the perfect one. I'll just do it tomorrow. I don't feel like it today.
Yeah, I feel sick.
Yep. I got things, right? So one thing that you see all the time, we see this happen in our business with agents, right? You see the same chaos, the same people over and over and over. It's not a matter of more or less chaos. It's a matter of what?
How they handle it.
Nope. It's a matter of the stories they tell themselves. Period. And that's just how they handle it, obviously. They just tell a story, well, it's okay, I can miss this one. Right? It's okay, I got this going on. And Joe's a perfect example of that. What are you saying?
Oh, I was gonna say that sometimes people tell themselves, well, I'm doing so much better than everybody else, so they give themselves a pass.
Yeah, we can talk about, though, like your huddle attendance is like 99%, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, an example, and you got 3 kids of your own, right? Plus a fourth one, you know, that's kind of a step kid, but the reality is you got some, you know, with one that can only make 60% of huddles, right? And the reality is it's a matter of what? The stories I tell myself, which really comes down to my commitment, right? If I committed to the fruit, which is aka the outcome, I got to drive my stories around that. So you got to be aware of like calling yourself out. This story is not going to serve me. This is not really getting what I want. This story is going back towards what? My feelings. If anything has to do with I feel or I'll get to or I will do, that's what? Feelings, right? And so ask yourself here, am I honoring the commitment or am I honoring my feelings? Am I honoring commitment or am I honoring the feelings? That's the difference in the gauge of the two. Right? That's the other part. That's super important. Number 2, right? Number 2 is my patterns. Sometimes in this situation, it's going to take doing what? Creating new patterns. Patterns that work for you all. So what else we do? Core 4. If you're new, you don't know what that is, but do it every single morning. That gives me power. Right? It also creates discipline to allow me to move through and be able to obviously build momentum in the mornings. Right? Most of that has to do with how you wake up and how you drive and how you start out the day. Right? I didn't want to be at the gym this morning in the cold at 6 a.m. But guess what? Was there at the gym at 6 a.m. because why? Committed to an outcome. And guess what that does? Afterwards, it builds momentum that already builds into here. Right? And so that's something that's super important as well. Number 3 is behaviors. Behaviors. That's one thing that's important. I look at behaviors as just like what happens when things go on. Do I stay focused to the outcome or do I get off track? Right? Do I get busy or do I keep going? And that's a perfect example. Well, if you start negotiating a deal, right, and you got a client wants to look at something, what do? Paul? You go show the property regardless of what you're negotiating on. Because guess what? I can negotiate in the car. I can negotiate in an airplane. I can negotiate anywhere, but I can only show property at that person that wants to look at something from out of town. Right? So I got to be able to hold myself in check, so to speak, on this. So the result of you guys 90 days is going to come down to one thing. What my focus is driven by. Is it driven by my fruit, which is obviously what I want, my outcome, right? My target, or my feelings? And I want you guys to be willing and be able to investigate what your stories are. This is once you learn about stories, like it'll change your whole life. I'm telling you, especially people that come here. Who here has come into our company and learned about stories? Right? Some of y'all. And what do you notice it?
Oh my God, you do that to your own family.
Yeah.
What I catch myself telling my kids, okay, so that sounds like a story to me. What's like the real bullshit?
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's crazy and it's hard. It's like trying to speak a different language, but once they get it, you get it, right? Yeah. And then the problem with stories, the number one problem with stories is that we or they believe them as fact. And so usually it's just a feeling that we believe is a fact. And that happens to me all the time. You got to give those around you permission to call you out. And I tell you all the time, Kaylee calls me out. She told somebody at the Christmas party that thing, right? She'll call me out on a story all the time. She's like, well, that's a great story. I'm like, well, yeah, shit. You know, it is a pretty good story, right? But the reality is you got to be willing to call yourself out and have others be able to call you out. But once you see others do it, especially you see it in family, right? If you've had the relative that just, the poor me, everything always goes sideways, nothing's ever good, the world's against them, right? All they are stories. but they attract that negativity based on the story because that's all they see. Does that make sense? And so that's what's going to drive make or break you here. Number 2, your patterns. There's going to be 2 things you have to do. 1, you're going to start new patterns, right? Why? Because if you have the patterns to get the result you want, you already have it. And so we got to help build that for you in small things. If you go from not working out at all to try working out every morning at 5 a.m. for 90 days, I'll go ahead and tell you right now that shit's not going to happen. Right? Why? How's it work out? Did it work out?
It worked out for about a month.
Right, for a month, right? And so the reality, I wasn't coming at you guys with that. I'm just saying I've seen it happen over and over and over. So the key here is I want to build patterns that are sustainable. Right? I try to be up at 4:30, 5 o'clock. Doesn't work. 5:30 is my sweet spot. And so the reality is you got to find what works and at least move it later. I could probably move it up earlier now, but it just works for me. Because if I'm up at 4:30 or 5, I'm dead by 5 p.m. You know what I mean? And so I want to be able to have a balance of both. And so that's the key part here. And the other thing is my behaviors. How am I reacting? How I'm behaving? It's a perfect example. What happens when something goes sideways? When things go crazy? When you got a bad client or a mean client? That's going to determine that is your behavior. I was telling Paul about an example we saw about yesterday. I said there's 2 things. You can get mad or you can get paid. Right? 2 things. I can get mad or I can get paid. And so once that happens, I focus on one thing. Getting around the problem and focus on getting paid.